Coming up this week on the Markcast, the XFL is assembled. XFL assemble. Assemble. We have everybody now. We have Doctor Strange coming out of the warp. We have Ant-Man, Iron Hulk. We have everybody hired. We have co-defensive coordinators for some of the XFL teams, video managers, directors of team operation, everything else. What does that mean for us moving forward to the XFL 2023 kickoff? I bring in Greg Parks of XFL Board to do an extensive breakdown on all the latest coaching hires.
Obviously, the USFL has taken some of the coaches who otherwise would have been in the XFL. You mentioned the 10 that moved over to the XFL, but there are still some in the USFL that may have, if not for the USFL, been on XFL coaching staffs. Given what was out there and what was available to them, these were pretty well-built staffs.
Then we have lots of CFL content this week. Lead commentator, broadcaster for the CFL on TSN Games, Rod Smith, stops by the show, gives his thoughts on everything headed into CFL Week 15.
I will say this, and I did call that game in Montreal. It is a very different Lions team, obviously, than the one when Nathan Rourke was leading the way, and they've got to adjust to that. And Vernon Adams is capable. He is capable of being a good to great quarterback.
And then Derek Taylor, longtime friend of the show, voice of the Blue Bombers, makes a long-awaited return appearance. So glad I could get Derek on.
There's so much to like, but the fundamental thing of being accurate and careful with the football and knowing when and where to make the plays, it's not there. It's BC's shot. I'm glad they shot their shot. I don't think they'll be successful with it, but if they are, I'm happy to eat my words.
I know this was the news we wanted this week, but it certainly might be the news we needed. Should be a good show. I hope you enjoy. Hey guys, welcome to the Markcast. Reed here, back in the home studio office. You'll see I tweaked a little bit of the stuff behind me, see if you notice any new accoutrements, but summer is over. Dorothy is back at school, which means that we are back in the home office. I think I've got this all figured out. I had some camera wonkiness during Greg Parks' interview, but I think we have everything going now. Really exciting show today. We have all the XFL is assembled. I thought that was clever. We have everybody that you could ever want hired. We have all the teams, all the hires, everybody finally unveiled. I know that this might not be the news that XFL fans wanted this week. I know there were rumors that the team names were going to either be the announcement or accompany this announcement, but might not be the news we wanted, but certainly is news that we need. Certainly to have all of these teams have their staffs in order headed into the draft here coming up, and then obviously kickoff, training camps, all that kind of stuff. Really loaded show today. I so appreciate Greg Parks of XFL Board stopping by. Greg, I told him in the interview, and I mean this for all the writers, this goes for the guys at News Hub as well and Newsroom, putting in the work here. This is the kind of stuff where having dedicated XFL writers is so beneficial to, because I would say, like a lot of people maybe watching this, I could be a little bit more of a casual when it comes to, okay, who exactly is this person, or what does that have to do with, the team, or, okay, we got co-defensive coordinators. Okay, what does that mean? Greg, and I know that Anthony and Mike, I just saw Jay post an article over at News Hub. This is the time when the writers get to shine. They get to go in, do a deep dive, really figure out who these, guys are and girls, in the case of Joe Welter being hired as well, and figuring out, how does this all relate? How do the coaches know each other? What is that going to help add into, the schemes and the thought process headed into the season for each of these teams? So super beneficial. Really appreciate, like I said, Greg did a deep dive list. I'm going to post the link on XFL Board, writing down all 8 teams, all the connections from all the teams, how the head coaches know the player, know the other coordinators and assistants and everything. If there were, hires that maybe were out of left field, how did they get in contact with the people? Lots of insights and knowledge from Greg. Really, really appreciate it. Extended with him today. So you guys definitely don't want to miss out. About 45 minutes with Greg, running down literally each and every team. Okay, how do these coordinators know each other? How did these people get involved? What does that say about the structure of the team moving forward? What should we expect? Offensively, defensively. Tremendous interview with Greg. I really mean that. We could have gone for a long time today, so I really appreciate Greg taking time. Yeah, he is in school as well right now, same as Dorothy, my wife, so really appreciate that. Then tons of CFL content this week. I am over the moon thrilled. We got Rod Smith on the show. Rod is the lead broadcaster, commentator right now, doing most of the play-by-plays for the CFL games. Rod, was in the studio for a long time, doing the role that Kate Burness does now, back out on the road, calling games. Really happy to get Rod's thoughts on. You could just tell the wealth of knowledge he has, running back, Grey Cups, and talking about Winnipeg's lineage, and talking about the Edmonton's team, and talking about all this kind of stuff. Really appreciate that. Lots of thoughts from Rod. Everything, week 15, CFL, Vernon Adams, and what's going on in Hamilton, and is Winnipeg, set up to be the next great dynasty of the CFL. Lots of good stuff with Rod. And then before the XFL stuff was coming out, I'm like, okay, we gotta. What are we doing this week? So I reached out to Derek Taylor, used to be with the Riders and Sports Cage over in Regina, back as the voice of the Blue Bombers now, taking over for Bob Irving that retired last year. Derek is great. I remember why I like talking to him so much before. He's always so busy. So I'm like, I don't want to. Some of these, it's like Rod Peterson, these guys that broadcast every day. I don't want to add on to the plate, but I really thought Derek was tremendous. Lots of insights. We talk quarterbacks, we talk, Montreal, we talk Hamilton, kind of all that same stuff. Great to get kind of a different voice this week as well. Rod has his opinions and he's great. And then Derek has his opinions and he's great. So lots of CFL content as well this week. Don't forget, like and subscribe. I have mailed the Spring League football, the Veterans Day ball to friend of the show, Brian Scott. Brian says he's going to be out of town for about a week. The ball should have arrived today, and then Brian will sign it when he comes back. I think he's going to take a photo with it. And then he is going to send that back so we can do the giveaway that way. A couple just news tidbits today. XFL has a new hire on the books, and I'm going to pull it up here. Should have been more prepared. Jason Gonella is joining the XFL as the senior vice president of ticket sales. You'll remember that Jason is taking over for Lisa Feigenbaum. She was hired back in June and then ended up taking the job over with the Philadelphia Flyers. I remember a lot was made of that. The XFL bleeding executives, kind of however you want to look at that. But Lisa was with the XFL, took what was reported to be, a great position jump to go with the Philadelphia Flyers. Now Jason has been hired today. As I keep messing around with this, so he'll come on, kind of help figure out the ticket sales, SVP of all that. The XFL's quote courtesy of Russ Brandon, president of the XFL. Jason is a seasoned industry veteran with decades of experience working at some of the most successful sports and entertainment venues and franchises in the U.S. His diverse expertise across ticketing, premium hospitality, and sponsorship sales, man, that's tough to say, will be critical for our league and help drive forward our dynamic ticketing product offerings and overall fan experience. In his role, Gonella will be responsible for all aspects of the league's ticketing sales, strategy, and analytics. He will develop and oversee a full suite of products, including season, group, and individual game tickets, as well as league pricing, packaging, and retention strategies to drive growth. Interesting, because obviously the XFL has begun taking season ticket deposits. So obviously Jason joining in now, would be curious to hear kind of when he got dropped into the pipeline. Obviously they announced everything today, but he could have been working, potentially for a little bit here. Curious to see where ticket sales go from here, what the pricing looks like compared to XFL 2020. Obviously the I believe it's $50 a ticket. I did my season ticket deposit for Seattle, but I think it's $50 to put your spot in line for that. And then we'll see where pricing rolls out from there. The other news coming out this week from our friends in St. Louis, remember St. Louis and all their news proclamations, the Randy Krakauers of the world, that the XFL announcements are coming. What was that, back in July at this point? We have a report, XFL keeping St. Louis BattleHawks name. First game is going to be in March. This is interesting. Two sides to this. So the first being that obviously the XFL, the BattleHawks name returning to St. Louis. I think we all expect that. I think we, at this point, and Mike Mitchell's been on the show, are talking, the 5 original names, I would imagine, are all returning. The new franchises, the San Antonio, Vegas, and Orlando, I think would likely get new franchise names at this point. But the quote from Andy Banker over at Fox 2, and I do love this. Like, I worked in local news a long time, and I love this kind of stuff. This is the quote. St. Louis officials say they expect the name BattleHawks to return, but they have not received confirmation from the XFL. So, take that for what it is. Like I said, I don't doubt the BattleHawks name is returning, but this is when I bemoan local news just a little bit. Of like, well, they're really confident it's returning, but they have had no confirmation whatsoever. So keep that in mind. Love Andy Banker, over with Fox 2, but the other interesting bit about this is that they don't expect the first home game at the Dome to be until March, because XFL is kicking off February 18th. And it would be those first 2 weekends. I'm looking here at my calendar. So it would be the 18th and the 25th. Those weekends are booked already at the Dome. So that would put the first home game potentially for XFL St. Louis to be the weekend of March 4th and 5th. Remember, that happened before. That happened back in XFL 2020. They didn't do the first St. Louis game for the first 2 weeks either. I can't remember if that was a slow rollout or, because they did the Seattle the one weekend and then they did DC, whatever. But St. Louis, potentially, St. Louis fans will have to wait. But this is interesting and I pulled this up. So this was back on Newsroom, where I found back in May, where Frank Cusimano of NBC4 KSDK reports that the Dome has reserved 5 weekend dates for next spring football for possible XFL home games in Seattle. So it's interesting that they would have, the Dome would have reserved those dates. So potentially this was already booked long before whatever is going to be at the Dome. You would think that they would be able to look at the calendar of events, right? Like I do conventions at the Seattle Convention Center. We know our dates booked through 2024, whatever at this point. But that is interesting. So the two little tidbits out of St. Louis, they're going to be hosting, potentially not till March, which honestly is better for my schedule. I am heading to Mexico following the XFL kickoff. So hoping that first game is in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And then I can make my way on down to Puerto Vallarta to join my family for a vacation. Keep that in mind. Delaying my vacation to Mexico. Going to go do the XFL opening and then head down to, you boys like Mexico? Head down to Mexico after that. But anyway, that's the news today. Lots of preamble here. I'll chapter mark this so you guys can jump ahead if you want. Have some giveaway news and stuff at the end of the show. Thanks as always for your support. Like and subscribe. Well, I could talk to this guest about my recent SmackDown appearance that I went to last Friday, but I think we should probably talk some XFL today. We have Greg Parks of XFL Board. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, Reed. Thanks for having me.
Well, Greg is a lifesaver. I was sitting there this week. I'm producing the show. I got great CFL guests, and I'm like, first off, like Monday, I'm like, we need XFL stuff to talk about because there have been, rumored and we're getting team names or we're getting whatever. And then thank goodness XFL announced all their coaching staffs, the full staffs Tuesday. I reached out to Greg. I said, Greg, I really need someone to talk about this week. Greg said, I'm literally writing an article right now for XFL Board, which I'll link on the show notes. I tweeted out. And so we're going to go through that today. Greg, how are you doing with just general thoughts now that we have some XFL news?
It's great to have something to talk about. I know I've said that before, and so we're not quite out of the woods yet in terms of the lulls that we'll have between now and January and February, but we're getting closer. We're getting closer to, we'll have the team names and logos and jerseys and all of that will be revealed. We got the draft being built. We've got the NFL Alumni Academy building there. team basically that they're going to be training, which is going to be of interest to XFL fans and the league itself. And then, the draft in November, which is just 2 months away. And so the days of having those long lulls, I think, are coming to an end here very soon.
Yeah, so the theme I'm going with this week, I think I'll record my stuff tomorrow, but I think the XFL is assembled now. This is Endgame. We have Captain America, right? Doctor Strange has come out of the void. We have everybody. We have equipment managers. We have video managers, co-defensive coordinators. I mean, we have everything that you could ever want. Yeah, big takeaways. I mean, we have, obviously 10 coaches. I was corrected today. We have 10 coaches defecting from the USFL, and then I believe a lot of staff as well. I had listener Van call me and say, it's more than just the 10 coaches. The 10 USFL, we have Jen Welter, as the first female, linebackers coach, right? What were the big kind of takeaways for you? And then you've done a great job, listing all the teams. We'll do kind of your standout coaches from each of those that you have listed, but just kind of general takeaways that you have.
It was sort of similar to my takeaway when I saw the head coaches being named, which was at first it was a little underwhelming. And then once you dig into it a little more and you understand the reasoning why, the light bulb sort of goes on. And so, I saw some names that were familiar, certainly, for the coaching staffs. And then you see some names that aren't familiar, but the more you dig into who these people are and the connections they have, it is really interesting. And that's really what my column was about, is looking at each staff and seeing what those connections were to each other, to the head coach, to the city that they're coaching in, because there were a lot of those as well. And it was really fascinating to kind of pull at all of those threads. And then you have some coaches that just don't seem to fit at all. That, you have one or two coaches per team where it's like, how did they come up with this guy? Almost, small college, or, hadn't been coaching in years. And, I think it was just a matter of, and I think one of the coaches mentioned this, I don't know if it was in the XFL Twitter Q&A with the coaches or somewhere along the way, that they were having just coaches call them and be interested in joining a staff. And that might have just how some of these staffs came together, was a coach just cold called a coach, or whatever connections behind the scenes took place that eventually brought them out. But it is also interesting to see how the staffs were assembled, what was emphasized in terms of, you look at Reggie Barlow's staff in DC, heavily influenced by HBCU schools. And then you have, the Jim Haslett staff. The offensive staff is almost all June Jones lieutenants. So you can kind of tell Haslett is sort of giving the offensive reins to June Jones, and rightly so, probably. And then you have others where, there are really deep connections between the head coaches and some of the assistant coaches. You connect other dots. And so that was really fun for me to go through each one of those and really dig into the background of these assistants who were named this week.
As you're giving this insightful answer, YouTube listeners will know, I got a new webcam. My webcam went wonky there for a minute, but I swear I was listening along. I think we got it locked down now. It was like tracking my hands as I was going crazy there. But no, yeah, something. So yeah, we got it locked down, ready to go. We're big time professional now, but it's interesting. I like this, and we've talked in the past, I think when you've been on, and others, the second chance, right, 54th man, whatever, of the XFL relates a lot to these coaches too. And there's a lot of people that wouldn't be getting, men and women now, that would not be getting maybe the same opportunities in other places. For me, I'm not the biggest like X's and O's. It seems these are fleshed out full staffs for each of these teams. Very surprising that way, just as in opposed to the USFL, where it was, we had one DPP for the whole league. Here, all these teams have team operations, team personnel, and all that kind of stuff. In terms of the scope that the XFL was hiring for year one, 8 teams, how do you feel that each of these is like totally fleshed out as much as you could be?
There's still some blanks to be filled, I think, on some of these staffs. We still had Rod Woodson, whose offensive coordinator was not announced, although, Mike Mitchell has had the scoop on that for a while now. We'll probably have to wait until after the college season for that to be announced. You've got teams that don't have special teams coaches, which could simply mean that, the special teams coaches may be hired later on, or certain, and this happens at the college level where there's a limit on the number of assistants they can have, certain aspects of special teams are split up amongst the rest of the coaches on staff. You have, for example, the running backs coach take the punt return team, the wide receivers coach take the kickoff team, and things like that. So you may not have a dedicated special teams coach necessarily. I think there was one coach that did not have a defensive backs coach. One team didn't have a defensive line coach. And again, those could be shared by the defensive coordinators who have those particular specialties in their background, but it could simply be that those positions just aren't filled yet and could be filled over the coming weeks and months. We still have a bit of time before training camp in January. That's really, I think you'd like to have your staff locked down probably for the draft in November. Certainly if you are a team and you're drafting defensive backs, for example, you'd like to have a defensive back coach, helping you to choose, what he's looking for in defensive backs. And maybe that's more of a defensive coordinator thing, but there is still room, I think, to add on some of these teams. Some teams have 10 assistant coaches. Some teams only have 6 or 7. So you do wonder, even though the word finalized was used by the XFL in their press release, you wonder how final these staffs really are.
Yeah, and I know that obviously there's been a lot of listener and viewer frustration, wanting team names, wanting those rolled out. I mean, I know we've lamented and marketing in the local markets and things like that. I think that all very much holds true, but I do think, it's either A and then B or B and then A in terms of getting these announcements out. Obviously, these needed to be put out in place. I imagine they've been in place for a little while now, finally being announced this week. And so, it's not going to be the XFL Seattles. So, we'll get there when we get there, but I do think having these in place as early as they are, letting these coaches all work together, like you said, approach the draft in that way, I think is very important in terms of, they're really going all in on this better be the highest quality of football that we've seen in an adult football league, just with all of these hands. I'm really curious to see what the gameplay looks like as we hit the field.
Yeah, these are definitely serious coaching staffs. I mean, there are a couple, as I mentioned, out of left field hires from high schools or lower colleges, but those are not the norm for these staffs. I mean, these are staffed by longtime NFL assistants, by longtime college assistants. This, I think it compares favorably, I would say, to XFL 2020 staffs. I don't think there's a lot different from that. Obviously, the USFL has taken some of the coaches who otherwise would have been in the XFL. You mentioned the 10 that moved over to the XFL, but there are still some in the USFL that may have, if not for the USFL, been on XFL coaching staffs. I think given what was out there and what was available to them, these were pretty well-built staffs.
Thoughts of, and I want to pull up the list, thoughts of the defectors from the XFL or from the USFL, and then I want to talk through these teams in specific. I know that Mike had the list here. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, just generally speaking, it is interesting because I think Chris Dishman was the first one who we found out was leaving the USFL to move to the XFL. And then there was another one, a coordinator who was going to be Rod Woodson's defensive coordinator in Las Vegas. So we knew of 2. And my thinking was, okay, there might be 1 or 2 more. Just because we know that USFL coaching contracts are a little different than USFL player contracts where the coaches have more freedom to move about. But 10 was, honestly shocking to me. I was surprised the number was that high. And I don't know what to chalk that up to. I don't know if the XFL is truly offering significantly more. I don't know. Maybe, I know a couple of them went to XFL Arlington. Is the prestige of being on a Bob Stoops staff maybe too hard to pass up? Maybe it's the time of year fit these coaches a lot better at this time in their lives, the XFL schedule in terms of when it's being played. So there are a lot of potential factors as to why, but it did take me by surprise that so many coaches are leaving what is really, say what you will about the USFL, but they got through year 1 and they're headed toward year 2. And there's something to be said for that stability especially if you're a coach where stability is not the norm. If you look at some of these coaching histories for some of these guys, it is extensive and it is broad and it is across the United States. So stability, you would think, would count for something, and they're taking a shot on a league that, although it's very different this time, has failed twice and has not gotten through a first season. So that does make you wonder in terms of that number of defectors.
I'm looking on here. Well, and we had Larry Fedora today, one of the 8 USFL head coaches, announcing that he was stepping away from the league, returning to spend time with his family. I think he might have another job, but it wasn't put out from the USFL comms. But he basically said in his exit kind of interview that were the USFL, were they to move to cities where he could maybe coach in the city, he would think about returning. But right now, he had no interest in returning to Birmingham with the hub, which is interesting.
Yeah, and you do wonder what these coaches were told about that. Were they told, hey, come on in, we're going to do a hub for 1 year, but then we're going to move to the cities in year 2, and then somewhere along the way that plan changed and they're like, nope, we're going to stick for the hubs. And then coaches like Larry Fedora, maybe some of the coaches who defected to the XFL were like, yeah, I'm not on board with that. So obviously, the official reason is spending more time with his family, which could be the ultimate reason, and maybe the hub thing was just sort of a side reason. But you do wonder if that may have played a role in some of these coaches moving over.
Yeah, so we have the list here. Mike tweeted, and look at this. I got a quote tweet on XFL Newsroom. That's exciting. I'm moving up in the world here. We got Mike posted 2 defensive coordinators, Corey Chamberlain, like you said, going to San Antonio via Birmingham, Tim Lewis going to Arlington via Houston, Chris Dishman, Las Vegas via New Jersey, John Heimbuck, Arlington via Birmingham, Bill Johnson, Houston via Birmingham. A lot of Birmingham coaches, which, they had kind of the cushiest gig. They had they had people in the stands over there. Craig McMahon, Houston via Houston, Ty Warren, Orlando via Houston, Mark Snyder, Orlando via Houston. I saw a lot of that too, that Kevin Sumlin basically has to rebuild his entire staff. Paul Spicer, San Antonio via New Orleans, and then Pat Perles, St. Louis via Tampa Bay. So, smattering across the teams there.
And the other thing that was interesting to me is I believe all of these moves were lateral moves. I don't think anyone moved from the USFL to the XFL for a higher level job. There was no position coach leaving to become coordinator or anything like that. In fact, it was Tim Lewis going from defensive coordinator now to co-defensive coordinator, I believe. So that is maybe a half step down. So it is interesting. I mean, you can't use the reason that while they're going to a better job in terms of title, they're making lateral moves here, which is another aspect of it that I think we need to bring up.
Yeah, and conversations I had today, for the most part, I don't believe XFL is vastly overpaying to get some of these people. I think that it is more, hey, I want to go to the XFL, right or wrong. XFL Rock, Danny Garcia, $7, whatever. Like, I want to be there. I think that like you said, a lot of lateral moves, and I don't think we're paying $500,000 to get any of these guys over here to take some of these coordinator positions.
Yeah, I think you're right. I would be hard pressed to imagine the pay is so significantly different that you would want to completely uproot your life and family to move to make a lateral move to another spring league. Maybe you do that if you're moving to a major college or to the NFL, but to another spring league, I just find it hard to believe that the difference in pay would really cause that.
It's really going to be interesting, player and personnel wise, for all of this USFL and XFL, and just it's fascinating to me, and I think it's great that we're getting the AAF XFL that we never really got. But to see this happen, and like you said, coordinator championship, it's like the Monday Night Wars now of spring football. I really like it.
Oh my gosh, that's Tim Lewis's music,
right? No, he's going to take. Someone comes out and takes like the USFL game ball, puts it in the trash, and they're like, no.
Oh gosh.
No. All right, so let's go down your list, because you actually did, and I want to give some people some tangible information that you have on here, because you did this great article. I'll link it on the YouTube. If I haven't by this point, I'm sure someone will have yelled at me that I haven't done that. So we have XFL Arlington head coach Bob Stoops. You have a standout spotlight for each of these teams. You have that for Bill Sheridan. Why is Bill Sheridan a get for Arlington, and are there any other big notable names that you know for the Arlington team?
Well, a lot of Bob Stoops' staff is returning actually from XFL 2020. Some of it is from the Dallas team. Some of it, as you mentioned, Jonathan Heimbach coming over from Tampa. So some of it is from elsewhere. I think Bill Sheridan is the only one who's not returning from XFL 2020. And I'm a Wisconsin Badgers fan, so that name stood out to me right away because he was hired to coach inside linebackers at Wisconsin for this year with the shuffling of their staff. And obviously Wisconsin, if you follow college football, they have one of the best defenses in the nation and have since Jim Leonard took over as defensive coordinator. So he would have been playing a big part in that. Unfortunately, there was some recruiting violations that came up that he was attached to while at Air Force that forced Wisconsin to let him go. I think he actually resigned, and Wisconsin head coach Paul Christ was not happy that it came to that. I mean, he was not happy to lose Bill Sheridan in that way. So, to go from a top-level defense in college football to being a linebackers coach in the XFL is why I thought it was a pretty good get because, I think he would have done some really interesting things with a young group at Wisconsin.
Oh, and I like that. I like that we have a little bit, playing dirty, a little bit recruiting, getting in there. I like that. You got to be aggressive here against the USFL. We got to get the best guys. So
there's that line of thinking too. Absolutely.
And then Jonathan Heimbach, he's been everywhere, right? He was he's been all the way. He was with the CFL. He was the Argonauts. He was with the San Antonio Commanders.
He's been with every incarnation of the XFL. He was on the Los Angeles Extreme in 2001 as a player, coached the Tampa Bay Vipers in 2020, and now he's back to coach in 2023.
And he follows the Markcast on Twitter, so that makes him even a better hire. No, but that was great too. I saw that name, and I think he had been rumored. Again, some of these names I know have been bouncing out for a while, but I know that was a big get. Excited there for that. Interesting to Scott Spurrier as well, right? He's obviously related to Steve Spurrier. Am I speaking out of turn here? And then Jonathan Hayes, Rick Mueller, really stacked. I mean, I think a lot of, like you said, the allure of Coach Stoops maybe brought a lot of people to that team.
And the coordinators for both offense and defense is really fascinating to me. And I'm curious as to how that's going to play out. And I mean, if you are the XFL and you are building a brand that is going to truly be behind the scenes, you could do worse than having drama amongst your co-coordinators. So not that I think that's going to happen, not that I'm wishing that's going to happen, but certainly you do wonder how that's going to play out. Jonathan Hayes and Chuck Long, the co-offensive coordinators, they work together with the BattleHawks. I think that offense is going to be a little different than the Hal Mummy run offense that Bob Stoops had in Dallas the first time around. And then the co-defensive coordinators, which is Jay Hayes, Jonathan's brother, and Tim Lewis. So that's going to be one of those things that, when this list came out, one of the things at the top of my list that intrigued me was, okay, you've got two co-coordinators. How is that going to play out during the season? So that's something to keep our eye on.
It's kind of like you got the New England Patriots. Who's calling the plays? What's going on? You got Matt Patricia out there with the clipboard. We did ask Bob Stoops when we were in the XFL Arizona showcase. I think it was Brandon Anderson with XFL News Hub. He goes, "What offense or whatever you're going to run? You're going to be running the Hal Mummy?" He goes, "No, we're going to do Jonathan Hayes and what they did with St. Louis. I have a feeling that we're gonna roll that in, like you said, and kind of marry that together with Bob Stoops, which should be kind of interesting. I don't know what that looks like. That'll be good."
Yeah, and they had a good offense in St. Louis. So high expectations for Arlington.
So Houston with Wade Phillips, right? You have Greg McMahon, one of your standouts, talking about the most grizzled XFL coaches, having a mix of youth with his standouts from the XFL Houston squad.
Yeah, and I just think that mix of youth and veteran wisdom, I'll say, is what really stands out to me about the Houston staff. You have AJ Smith, who is this sort of boy wonder, offensive whisperer, I guess, who's going to be their offensive coordinator. Peyton Pardee coming from another wide open offense in Houston. I'm speaking of the University of Houston. And then you got Andre Gerard, who played for Wade Phillips in Dallas. So a lot of young guys on offense. Then you've got Brian Stewart, who was a coordinator for Wade Phillips back in Dallas. Bill Johnson, longtime defensive line coach in the the NFL. Greg McMahon, longtime special teams coach in the NFL. So you've got a couple real veterans on that team, but you've also got some up-and-comers. So I think the balance that Wade Phillips struck in his staff between that youth, and I mean, he coached with Sean McVay. I mean, he at his age still has that youthful countenance about him. And so I think he likes being surrounded by young, talented people, just like he was with Sean McVay in LA. So that's going to be a really fun staff.
Yeah, AJ Smith, like you said, lots of eyes on that. Wade, he'll pop up on Twitter every once in a while. I agree, co-sign what you're saying, where kind of the old guy, but he's like, I can be hip here. I can get some of these young cats around me and make it roll. Interesting, moving there. You had Greg McMahon, like you said, another coach coming from the USFL, special teams. Any other takeaways from Houston? You want to move on to Orlando?
Yeah, we can move on to Orlando, which is the first real kind of wild card of our list, because Terrell Buckley, no head coaching experience, very little assistant coaching experience. So who was he going to draw from? And he brought a lot of Floridians to the staff. So a lot of people familiar with the area. Maybe that's a good thing if you are wanting boots on the ground and wanting to attract fans who maybe recognize some names. Assistant head coach was something that jumped out to me. And if you are a first-time head coach like Terrell Buckley, who does not have a lot of, he's not been a coordinator anywhere or anything like that, it's probably a good idea to have someone dedicated to assist you. I mean, we know that there are a lot of game day responsibilities that head coaches have. And if you have someone who can be your right-hand man to help guide you through those or help alleviate some of those issues, that's probably a smart move.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's like again, like the Patriots. It's like I'm assistant to the whatever the heck Patricia's name. I'm like the assistant to the offensive coordinator. I don't know what the hell his name is. It's very weird. Shane Matthews, backup quarterback, making stronger coaches. Or they're 14 seasons. So you're high on Shane Matthews as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, he was a longtime backup quarterback, but he doesn't have any even college or pro coaching experience. I think most of his or all of his coaching has been at the high school level. So you do wonder what he's going to bring, especially knowing that quarterbacks are going to make or break this league. Quarterbacks are so important. The XFL is really putting a premium. They've hired Jordan Palmer to work with quarterbacks during the next few months. So obviously that's going to be a big deal. And so, aside from offensive and defensive coordinators, perhaps quarterbacks coach is the most important hire one of these teams can make. So Shane Matthews, who's been around a lot of offenses in the NFL and has been a backup a lot of different places. So he's got a lot of coaching to draw from in his role.
Do you like the Jordan Palmer quarterbacks thing? I don't think we've had your thoughts on that since they've officially announced him working with the quarterbacks.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, and I've pounded the table about this for a long time, is that quarterbacks are going to be the key to the on-field success of a league like the XFL. We know that it's hard enough. If you watch week 15, 16, and 17 of the NFL, it's hard enough for the best league in the world in terms of attracting talent to put competent quarterbacks out there. And so when you get to a league like the XFL or the USFL, you're, you have players that are talented, but they have some severe deficiencies to them that have prevented them from even latching onto NFL rosters or practice squads. So to have someone like Jordan Palmer, who is a quarterback guru, work with these players and prepare them as best they can for the regular season, I think is a smart move. Look, once the season starts, and it's kind of all up to the players at that point. But the XFL, I think, wants to say, we've done what we can. We've done everything. We've exhausted every resource we can to have our players, specifically our quarterbacks, prepared to put the best product on the field we can for the fans.
Well, like you said, especially where you're bringing in, you look at the USFL and the Kyle Sloters of the world, Teamu, these guys, and I mean, even the CFL, I was talking to our CFL guest today, like, you have these guys that just are missing a couple of things and to get the whole package together, and having the good quarterbacks coaches on the teams, and obviously Jordan Palmer, I think, is incredibly important for that. At Vegas with Rod Woodson, this is the big one, Jen Welter. Jen's a longtime follower of the Markcast. Jen is being brought on as the linebackers coach. A big deal as well, right? First female. Well, she was the first female in the NFL, and now in the alternative football too, right? I mean, checking a lot of boxes.
Yeah, she worked in the AAF actually beforehand. But yeah, she's here. And look, this is Danny Garcia practicing what she preaches, right? Because she's preached inclusion, she's preached diversity, and certainly Jen Welter fits that mold. Looking at that Rod Woodson staff, heavy on the defensive backs. Rod Woodson, a former defensive back himself, his defensive coordinator Chris Dishman played defensive back in the NFL. Obviously, defensive backs coach Darren Perry played for a long time. All three of them played in the NFL for a very long time. So I would expect if you're a defensive back going to Las Vegas, no excuses for you. I mean, you better play out.
Yeah, and then Joey Klingsale as well coming on. That I think was announced. Again, I guess like which one of these are announced before? He was with the Wildcats, Raiders, Jets. An extensive resume there as an executive and as a player. Interesting there. You get these guys though, like the Rod Woodson. I don't know if it'll be like the Kirby Wilsons of it all, where like Kirby Wilson's the best running backs coach in the world, but are you able to translate that to be a leader of men on the field? That'll be interesting.
And the bottom line is you don't know until you put them in that position, right? So who knows? Rod Woodson could be a dynamic coach who wins the championship. He could be like Kirby Wilson, who maybe falls on his face, but you're not going to know until you put him in that position. And Jim Nagy, who is the head of the Senior Bowl, had a tweet I took notice of maybe several weeks ago, a month ago, is that head coaching is not about X's and O's. Head coaching is about being, like you said, a leader of men. And I think when you look at Rod Woodson, when you look at Hines Ward, when you look at Terrell Buckley, some of these head coaches who don't have the vast experience coaching that some of these others do, what you can say about them is they do have those dynamic personalities to lead. They have the credentials as a player so that these players who play for them, they might say, look, he doesn't have a lot of coaching experience, but man, he played in the NFL for a long time. He went to Pro Bowls. He went to Super Bowls. I can believe what he's saying. And so that's what being a head coach is all about. It's not so much schemes. It's not so much personnel. It's, can you lead? Can you inspire? Can you get the most out of your players? And I think these particular head coaches, while they are short on experience, are long on those kind of factors.
Hines Ward here with San Antonio. I saw a lot of the tweets out about, a lot of the guys on his team. I got the Jamie Elizondos of it, a friend of the show, Darius Bell, obviously on there as well. Thoughts on San Antonio? You have Scott Boone as your standout. Thoughts on the staff that Hines has assembled?
It seems a very CFL heavy staff. So he took some from north of the border, Jamie Elizondo, Josh Nicewander, both who were with the Tampa Bay Vipers in 2020, reprising their roles as offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach, respectively. You have Corey Chamblin, the defensive backs coach, who is a former CFL head coach. So it does have a Canadian flavor to this San Antonio team, which is not what I would have predicted probably for a Hines Ward-led team. Obviously, Joey Porter, the linebackers coach, has a connection through the Steelers with Hines Ward. And Scott Boone was my standout or my spotlight coach because he's coaching tight ends despite the fact that he has never coached tight ends before that I can tell. And there are three other coaches on the staff who have coached tight ends before. So it's just interesting the way the roles fell for this particular staff.
I think it was Rod Woodson when we were in Arizona was like, the XFL is about maybe finding players, playing them out of position where they normally would be, right, to get the – I mean, maybe Hines is thinking that as well, right? We're going to plug in some of these coaches.
And there are some coaches who believe that. I think it was the Green Bay Packers. I'm not sure if it was under Mike McCarthy, but he would, Alex Van Pelt would be quarterbacks coach one year. Then he would be the running backs coach. I mean, he was constantly shuffling his staff, and it's helpful because when Alex Van Pelt eventually becomes offensive coordinator, he's got that experience as quarterbacks coach. He's got that experience as running backs coach. He's got that experience running several different position rooms that's going to come in handy when he's coordinating an entire offense. So there is a theory and some belief to that, hey, let's put these guys in different roles and try them out, and it's going to benefit them in the long run, really.
The Coach Elizondo one, that's interesting. He came off the horrendous year with the Edmonton Elks last year. I mean, I know that he was on fire with the Vipers before that, really had a hard time up in Edmonton, was let go after his first season. Edmonton is still struggling this year with Chris Jones returning, but that is interesting. I think maybe he's better focused in that offensive coordinator. And then the Corey Chamberlain, I saw that hit the news waves all across the CFL. People are very interested in that. Even Rod Peterson, a big CFL media guy, that broke news on his show. I think he led his show with that yesterday because the news had just come out at the same time. So, it's a way for the XFL to kind of get the attention of some of these CFL teams as well. Some of the CFL media bringing in some of these guys,
Absolutely, yeah.
So Seattle here, obviously this can be my team. I think this is a pretty stacked team on paper. Jim Haslett and June Jones, Randy Mueller. Your standout, Matt Fleisch. I'll let you.
This is one of those out of left field hires, so I've never heard his name said before. So let's call him Matty F, the linebackers coach, who comes from Hofstra Division III college, and so that's one of those things that stands out to me when you've got June Jones coordinating your offense, who has all the experience in the world, and his offense is being run by his guys. Dan Morrison, Dennis McKnight, Wes Swan. They're all returnees from Houston XFL 2020. Ty Knott was with the DC Defenders. And then you got Ron Zook, who's coordinating the defense, former University of Florida head coach. And, the defense is kind of interesting because there's not a lot of names there for not a lot of standout names for the defensive position coaches. So it'll be interesting to see how that works and whether or not that has any effect on the field.
Yeah, you figure especially with Haslett, Randy Mueller, you have all these guys, years of experience. I mean, Randy's been an executive in the NFL, I think, multiple time executive of the year with that. June Jones, it's like Bob Stoops. They get the pick of the litter, any of these guys. So I would definitely take note with a lot of the individuals brought in. Curious your thoughts on Coach Beck with St. Louis, right? First year head coach as well, talking about that, wanting to get a lot of people around him to help support. You had Leroy Glover as one of your standout thoughts on the St. Louis squad.
So there was a lot of concern when Anthony Beck hired two first-time coordinators, as he's going to be a first-time head coach with very limited pro coaching experience. And I think once we look at the position coaches, Art Valero on offense has extensive NFL experience. On defense, you have Dave Steckel, the linebackers coach, who has extensive experience. So there is at least one position coach on each side of the ball who has a lot of that experience that maybe the coordinators don't. So I think they'll be working closely with the coordinators in that respect. And mentioning Leroy Glover, he's another guy who doesn't have a ton of coaching experience, but he's that 10-year plus NFL vet who's made the Pro Bowl, led the NFL in sacks in 2000. So he's like a lot of the newer coaches who they may not have a thick coaching resume, but they're a name player who's played in the NFL for a very long time, and they know what it takes.
I'm just looking here. I'm reading through your notes on this, talking with Anthony Beck. It'd be interesting. Beck's a good one. I think he's, like you said, the spotlight for the league in terms of media. They got him running around like Willy Wonka in St. Louis and taking photos at the arch and stuff like that. Because that. Any thoughts on Coach Beck before we go to Barlow?
I think he's been the most dynamic coach, certainly the most social media friendly coach, and I think that's going to fit well in St. Louis. That has a fan base that really wants to embrace this team, as we saw in 2020, and I think Beck is going to be the beneficiary of there. But St. Louis, by the same token, is going to be the beneficiary of Beck's big personality. I mean, he does have a big personality, and I think it's going to fit very well in St. Louis. I think they're going to love him.
Yeah, it's just good. That was another one. Pat Perles, coming from the USFL offensive line coach with the CFL as well. Yeah, I saw there was like 6 or 8 CFL guys that hop ship. I know the 10 USFL. Coach Barlow in DC, obviously the big news. I mean, we knew this already, but the Greg Williams as the defensive coordinator, that's a big standout there. I think got a lot of eyeballs. Vaughn Hutchins, big, has been very active. I've seen on social media, and they're doing some private tryouts in DC that's gotten some news as well. Jamie Sharper's your standout. Thoughts on the DC squad?
So my impression of this was going to be similar to how Jim Haslett allowed June Jones to kind of pick his staff on offense. My impression was, given that Reggie Barlow, he's been a head coach for a number of years, but at the college level. So I'm thinking, bringing on a coordinator the level of Greg Williams, who was probably one of, if not the biggest name coordinator to be hired, he would let Williams kind of have his pick of the guys that he's developed over the years a relationship with defensively. And it doesn't look like that was the case. A lot of the defensive staff is made up of former HBCU coaches that Reggie Barlow would be familiar with, similar to how he's built the offensive side of the ball. So it looks like, Barlow had a pretty big say in setting up this coaching staff. Jamie Sharper, the one that stands out, the one that's not really from the HBCU. But again, he's a guy who, like Leroy Glover, doesn't have a lot of coaching experience, but who's won a Super Bowl, who's played in the NFL for a number of years, and is going to command respect, maybe not through his coaching history, but through his playing history.
Do you like how they release all this information? Would you have done it any other way? Do you think this was fine press release for filling out? I didn't know how much play the athletic trainer and a lot of these, the minutia of it was going to get. But certainly for all football fans, you're kind of all in. But thoughts on how they released everything?
It's tough because I'm kind of looking at it from the perspective of what I would find most fascinating, and that would be all the bells and whistles and make it a big deal and, have a party and do all that kind of stuff. But realistically, the general fan base out there, the football fan who may be aware of the XFL, know that The Rock and Danny Garcia own it, maybe even know that it's going to be on ESPN next year, these names may not mean a whole lot to them. So is it worth it to put all that pomp and circumstance into an announcement like this when you can very easily just throw it out on Twitter and on XFL.com and really get enough traction that way? Ultimately, I guess I was fine with it. I don't know what more I would have done to do that unless you had a big reveal of all the coaches in the cities. Anytime you can involve the city in an announcement that is about that city's team, I think you want to do that, just if nothing else than to remind fans that, hey, you have an XFL team coming here in February that's going to start playing. We want to be constantly reminding you. We want to be constantly in your mind as you think about sports in general and football. So, you could have done something like that. Maybe it would have been hard to get everybody together. But, I was ultimately, given the other options that were out there and the difficulty in pulling some of them off, or the small net gain that I think would have been made in some of these, I think ultimately they did the right thing.
It's my understanding that potentially the team names were ready to be released, and for whatever reason that they didn't come out. I think I've been told that maybe these staffs have been together for a while. My question is, what that would have looked like differing. I know that they're still hiring in the cities, and I don't think anyone in Seattle knows that the Dragons. I worked in local news here for a long time. I don't know if anyone's talking about that. So I'm curious, if it were the team names, were we having events? Were we doing anything streaming? I'm just curious what that would have looked like if it was the two of the bigger announcements that was coming, yesterday or Tuesday.
I think that's worth bringing up because from my recollection of I've talked to some people, but when I was at the Florida showcase, the timeline that I believe we were given was late September, early October for coaching staffs to be fully revealed. So this is actually ahead of that timeline. And there's not a lot of times we can talk about the XFL in this version being ahead of the timeline that they set up. So this, could this be then a replacement for news that was scheduled about teams, and maybe the teams got moved back, so they said, okay, we got to get some news out there, let's pull this ahead a few weeks and announce it here while we're still working on the ins and outs of the team names, logos, what have you. So I guess that's possible, but that's just speculation on my part.
That feels I feel that vibe, or I vibe with that position. I think that I've kept you over. Last couple things before I let you go. I really appreciate your extended time tonight. On paper, Dallas looks really strong. Seattle looks really strong. And obviously we don't know any players. I mean, this is like the earliest of preseason, whatever. But in terms of coaching staffs, who do you put the priorities on that you think to look out for?
Yeah, I think absolutely. Arlington is number one in my book, and I had mentioned in my column, Bob Stoops, I thought on paper put together the strongest staff in XFL 2020. Didn't necessarily translate onto the field, but it looks like his staff, to me, is the strongest for 2023 as well. You mentioned, largely by virtue of June Jones and his offensive staff, Seattle is up there. I think everybody else is kind of in the same boat. Wade Phillips has some interesting names there with AJ Smith and Peyton Party. I'm kind of interested to see what they do with that offense there. And so there's something a little bit different about each one of these teams. And that's what I kind of tried to draw out in my column, how each staff was built a little differently than the others, but ultimately I think it's pretty. I don't see one as being, this team is just, hand them the championship trophy now, because no matter what players they have, the coaching staff has already won the XFL championship. I don't see any team that stands out that much, or even on the other end. It just, I look at it and I don't know how they're going to make it through the season. There's no teams that look like that. So I think that's a good thing that everybody seems to be on the same level, at least at this point.
Well, I want to thank you so much for your time today. I can just tell, talking with you, the tremendous work that went in. I would encourage, like I said, I'm going to post the link on the YouTube. The amount of work Greg put into kind of researching all this, I think this is really the time where all football writers shine, right? Because you're able to go through, research all these things. Because like I said, I don't know necessarily, certain names stand out to me, certain names to you, certain names to other people. And so I think collecting as many opinions as we can of that, but I think it's a time for writers like you guys to shine. And I know that a lot of the guys over at News Hub are doing the same thing. I know Mike had a big article out about DC, and I believe Anthony is writing for the San Antonio team. That would be Jay. Anthony is one of them. Anyway, this
Arlington, I think he's got. I saw his column out today.
Yeah, this is the time when I would check out these sites, and especially Greg's over here, just because it's got all the teams together. And I really appreciate you coming on and walking through, because it's just a ton of work. So.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of fun. Again, whenever we have something to talk about, it's a lot of fun to dive into it. So I appreciate you having me. Well,
yeah, I'm just really going to hold you to that. I got to figure out, my camera keeps tracking around, but otherwise I think we got it going. But I'll hold you to that. I appreciate it. Exciting times. Hopefully, I don't want the team names and all that to get lost. That's been my concern of now we're in the NFL season and all of that. But this got a lot of traction yesterday. My reporting and yours and everyone's going out there. So certainly people are paying attention. So I think this is good.
Great.
There we go. All right. Thanks, Greg.
Awesome. No problem.
Greg Parks with the XFL Board. We'll sign off here, and I have a couple things to tell Greg in private. So thanks so much.
Thanks.
Well, I'm thrilled today. We have Rod Smith, CFL on TSN, all over the place, kind of the voice of the CFL right now. I really appreciate you coming on, Rod. How are you doing?
My pleasure, Reed. Good to chat with you.
This is good. I was talking, my wife watches a lot of the games alongside me. I said, it's the guy that you hear call most of the games right now. You're prevalent across the CFL right now. How is it going now? Your second year kind of back in the booth, right?
It's a lot of fun. I mean, I'm late in my career, and I really wanted to do this again. For the previous 6-7 years, I've been the host of the panel, and Kate Burness took over there, and it was a chance to call some games. I actually started doing this in the late 90s, and then it evolved into more studio work, but I always loved it. I've had a lifelong passion for the league, growing up in Ottawa, and it's a fun way to watch a football game, getting to call them. I really like it.
So what have you made of the CFL this year? Obviously, last year was a little bit coming off of COVID and everything. Thoughts on the entertainment value of the CFL this year?
Well, I'm always a little bit biased with this, but I've really enjoyed that too. There've been, to me, what really makes a game fun to call is when there's an element of the unexpected, and when there are comebacks, and maybe when the underdog does something that you don't expect as well. I like the excitement. I like close finishes, and we've had a lot of drama. We didn't have much this past week, but for the most part, there have been a lot of dramatic games, endings, crazy finishes, things like that. So for the entertainment value, and I like it more than last year, although I cut last year some slack because they didn't play it all in 2020. You know, they didn't have proper training camps or preseason games or anything to get some of the kinks out when they played. And I still found a lot of the games last year to be enjoyable. But this year more so. It's been a fun season so far.
Well, it feels like we're finally just being able to talk football. You know, we had the whole Nathan Rourke stuff and now Vernon and everything, and I obviously want to get your thoughts on that as well. But it does just feel like the game is kind of able to take first in front of mind right now.
It is. And as I said, I mean, there were a lot of things being said about the league last year, and I understand it. I mean, you know, maybe more negative things about the attendance or about the play. Things like that. I just think it was a victory to get up and get running again. I was concerned when they didn't play at all in 2020. I understood it, but I really thought it was imperative that they get playing again last year, and they did. And it was an exciting finish to the season. And, you know, overall, I think it worked out well under the circumstances that it faced. But, you know, you're right. I mean, I think it's taken a necessary step in the right direction this year, too, coming off that 2021 season.
What storylines are you tracking in your mind? I mean, obviously, yeah, BC, and I want to get your thoughts, but what to you is the biggest storyline of the CFL right now?
Well, the low-hanging fruit here, the obvious one is Winnipeg. I mean, we haven't seen this type of potential dynasty in a long time. The Edmonton, then known as the Edmonton Eskimos, won the Grey Cup 5 straight years from 1978 through 82. And they had a bunch of Hall of Famers, some of the best in Canadian Football League history. And we really haven't seen well, let's see. Toronto in the 90s, they won back-to-back with Doug Flutie. Montreal won back-to-back with Anthony Calvillo in 09 and 10. But we really haven't seen the type of team that the Winnipeg Blue Bombers have in a long, long time. And I'm really curious to see. They're the betting favorite, as they should be, to win the Grey Cup again, and that'd be for the third straight season. What they can do. It's really a remarkable story for those who appreciate and know the history of the Canadian Football League. What Winnipeg is doing is pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, it really does feel it's almost, well, it got almost boring to watch last year, which is the problem when you have a dynasty and you have a team that's like so much head and shoulders over anyone else.
Right. I guess so. I mean, it comes at you could say that about a lot of sports too, Reed. And I'm sure if you're a fairly broad interest sports fan, sometimes it's a bit harder to get as fired up about the one that's always winning until after the fact you'll look back at it, and maybe there'll be like New England Patriots fans who are fans of football that may have hated the Patriots while they were winning all the time, and when the time comes, maybe even this season when they're no longer even close to competing at the level they once did, you might have a greater appreciation for what they were able to accomplish. But I found that I'm a little bit older, and I got tired of Muhammad Ali winning all the time, and then later, once he was trying to get his career going again and fought Larry Holmes, and I remember cheering for Ali then and appreciating all the things that he'd done before. But point being, sometimes greatness isn't appreciated in the moment. Sometimes it's not truly appreciated until later. And I who knows, for people that are tired of the Bombers winning all the time, a reminder, when they won in 2019, it was the first time in just about 3 decades, 29 years they had gone without a championship. So I can understand them thoroughly enjoying all these moments right now.
Speaking of I have my BC gear on today. I call America's I call the BC Lions America's CFL team. So that's kind of what we've branded that. I have a stamp from Randy Ambrosi, said that was okay to call him that. What do you make now? We're finally seeing Vernon this week, right? Rick came out this week. I was surprised we didn't see Vernon at all with the Pipkin and everything. Horrendous game last week. What are you making of VA going to BC and everything happening there?
Well, I can see why he didn't play too much in Montreal. I found it a little bit odd. I think Rick Campbell wanted to give him that chance, being back where, he called home for several years. But, I don't think he knew the playbook yet. I think he needs those first team reps and needs more time to prepare. And it just wasn't happening. And so it's probably best that he sat and he watched, because it's not like he played much in all the weeks leading up to it since week 2. And I think he needs more time to get ready. So, but I will say this, and I did call that game in Montreal. It is a very different Lions team, obviously, than the one when Nathan Rourke was leading the way, and they've got to adjust to that. And Vernon Adams is capable. He is capable of being a good to great quarterback. We saw that in 2019 when he threw for almost 4,000 yards, and that was not in a full season. He came off the bench after the starter, then Antonio Pipkin, got hurt. But he has been plagued by inconsistency, and sometimes, moments where his confidence just isn't there. So a change of scenery, I think, was good for him. But I don't know. They have so much talent there. After 2 games, they clearly are not the same team without Nathan Rourke, and they've got a couple of huge games coming up now for second in the West against the Calgary Stampeders in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, I've seen comments like, well, BC, it just proves that BC wasn't even. I said, well, I think when your starter goes down, I think you can be a great team as anything, and trying to kind of figure out, Pipkin is not a suitable replacement to what is like Jesus coming into the CFL right now that was Nathan Rourke this year. It's hard to go from like that to a backup and be like, well, see, clearly it was all Nathan Rourke. I do think, like you said, that the team is good even without Rourke.
Oh, that defense had been terrific. That they have a lot of talent. Their set of receivers is absolutely outstanding. They just have to find a quarterback that can do some of the things, not even all of the things, but some of the things that Nathan Rourke was able to do with them. Just the chemistry that he had on that offense. I will say this, though, they have struggled on special teams. They know it. Their coverage units, the return teams are not as strong. They're lower down. They're ranked lower down in the CFL. And when you're winning, your weaknesses tend to get glossed over. They get exposed more when you start losing games. You start seeing where you could be better. So I think that's one aspect. Special teams, even though they have a great kicker and a great punter too, I still think, as I say, coverage and return need more work. And I think they're well aware of that. But I like their defense. A lot of the talent that they have. I certainly agree with you. This is not just Nathan Rourke. That's the only reason why they're good. It doesn't work that way, but he certainly has made a difference on this team that I don't think anyone anticipated to start the season, how good he was going to be. And yeah, it's a major fall off right now. We'll see what Vernon Adams can do when he has more time to prepare and adjust to BC.
We've talked, right, for the last, 2 weeks now since Vernon, since the trade was announced and all that, really feels like it's sink or swim time for Vernon. We've had all the Montreal, obviously the other teams in the past, but we're really setting you up here to go. It really is kind of like put up or shut up time.
Yeah, that's a good way to read it. You're not wrong, because as said, when Nathan Rourke was there and healthy, it wasn't just him. It's Lucky Whitehead. It's an offensive line that was doing a pretty good job protecting him. Brian Burnham injured but coming back, and another spectacular receiver. Dominic Rhymes having a career year. Keon Hatcher. Butler. They got a lot of offensive talent. So to put Vernon into that, and talking to him last week, and he realizes it too. There's a lot of talent to work with there, and I think he knows that. I think the story of his CFL career has been highs and lows. Even week to week, where you see the potential brilliance of that quarterback and then really struggle the next week. And as said, it was talked about many times last year about how his confidence level was a bit of a roller coaster too. So riding all those highs and lows. So given all of that coming into this situation, I don't disagree. I think there's a certain amount of pressure on him as far as his career goes to prove that he can still be among the elite quarterbacks in the Canadian Football League.
Yeah, I exactly to continue to be at that level and not be looked at like as an Antonio Pipkin or someone that can kind of fill in if you need to. Montreal Sans Vernon now, right? We've had all the Gary Stearns of it all and everything else. What have you made of everything happening in Montreal the last, month now? It seems like.
Well, I'm just glad the franchise is still stable with the ownership financially. That doesn't seem to be an issue right now, even though Gary Stern, no longer has his hands on the wheel. It was interesting. If nothing else, some people didn't like his activity on Twitter. I thought it was entertaining. I've never seen an owner get so actively involved, in social media the way that he was doing. Yeah, it's interesting because it is a good team, and in a division this year that everything is still, even with the Argos a couple of games ahead, it's still, I think, up for grabs. But it's funny you asked the question that way, because some of these teams I look at, and Toronto and Montreal would be that way. One week to the next, I really don't know what to make of them. Montreal looks like a team that, when everything is going, could beat anybody, and they proved it. They beat Winnipeg in Winnipeg. The only team to beat the Bombers this year. So the Alouettes have a lot of good players, and they do have a good team. But there have been a few moments too where they've looked a lot less than that, and they need more consistency down the stretch, I think.
Yeah, same like you said. Same with the Argos. I can't figure out if this is a good team.
I can't figure them out. Can't figure them out.
Do you like McLeod? Are you an MBT guy?
I like them. I do. I mean, there are a lot of quarterbacks this year, and just like when I was describing with Vernon, where you see them look really, really good at times, and then make critical mistakes at times. McLeod himself, when talked about as he's moving up the passing charts in the history of the Toronto Argonauts, has said himself, I'm a 500 quarterback. And, he's above 500 now, but he's not wrong in that assessment. He has been historically that way. But you look at his numbers, I think he leads the league in passing yards right now. He has some very solid numbers, as does Trevor Harris, by the way, when you're talking about, Toronto and Montreal, where statistically the numbers are good. And then you look to the one-loss column, and that's where both of them need some improvement. I mean, even though the Argos are 7-5 right now, but could I see Toronto winning a Grey Cup with McLeod, Bethel Thompson? Are they capable of doing it? I think they are. I mean, he's shown signs. He's a very strong-arm quarterback. The way he's worked with Curly Gittins in particular, in Canadian football with the wider field, that wide side out makes better use of that receiver in that position than I think any other team in the league does. And because of the strength of his arm and his willingness to make that throw, he's had some downs, but I've seen too many things go well for him to have major doubts about him or anything like that. He's capable of leading a team back. I've seen him do it a couple of times. So, but I think he's another one, and he'd admit that too. He needs to be more consistent.
It's hard. It's you get a lot. It's like the Vernon. You get these guys, and I love them and their story and everything and their personalities. And like I've seen, McLeod, talking to the guys in the locker room, right? They post those clips, and you're like, God, you just need them to be more consistent across the board. You wish that the plays sometimes lived up to kind of who they are as a person. Yeah,
he's really an interesting guy. He's a great guy to talk to. I mean, very philosophical. He's very introspective. He's very thoughtful. He reads a lot. He's a very smart guy. I always look forward to a chance to chat with him before a game. Because he'll go off the board sometimes. The metaphors he uses and everything else. He's an interesting guy. And as I said, I think that, this is the first year that they're fully committed to him. Before last year, Nick Arbuckle was around. And the year before that, James Franklin, and it was never, McLeod always seemed to be viewed as the backup. And I think he's embracing the undisputed starter's role this year.
Yeah, I learned of him, in the COVID year, he came down and played in the spring league, and that was where we first learned of, because obviously we weren't following CFL at that time. But this is a crazy guy. Like, he's just kind of, he's like a pro wrestler a little bit, kind of I called him like a John Moxley. That's a pro, I don't know if you follow wrestling, but just a little unhinged, but really deep thinking and kind of just an interesting cat. I really like that. Speaking of quarterbacks teams, Jake Mayer, right, coming on crazy now. We're talking like Bo Levi, retiring, or like I saw, is he going to the XFL or whatever? But what do you make of Calgary now? I mean, clearly supplanting BC here as like the second most dominant team in the West, I would say, and I'm a BC fan.
Yeah, I would say so now. I think it's coming. They're tied in wins. BC still has a game in hand, so one fewer loss, but I watched the Stampeders. I was in Edmonton for their game against the Elks, and that was a one-sided rivalry this year, and it's over. Mayer looks solid. At the very least, he's a very solid quarterback, and I never thought I'd see the day where Bo Levi Mitchell was benched. That didn't leave on his own terms, so it's an odd sight. But Mayer he's been proving his worth, and they're in a solid spot. That's a good team. I mean, their games against Winnipeg were very competitive too. A couple of them quite close, I believe, and that's the one team that they haven't been able to beat. I mean, they lost that one to the Lions when Rourke was healthy, and that was they had the second half lead and they couldn't hang on. And that was an outstanding game in Calgary a few weeks ago, which I think BC won by a point. But right now, Rourke had a huge game in that one, and he's not there. So I certainly think Calgary is, justifiable favorite to finish up in second place, unless, as I say, we start seeing things from Vernon again that he can rejuvenate that BC offense.
Yeah, I mean, is that the game? I'm just looking this weekend. I mean, that has to be the game of the weekend, right? Lions at Stampeders. I mean, Ticats have just so fallen out. What do you make of the Ticats? Just not. I mean, here, I saw them. I was in Hamilton. I mean, they were a couple, win point changes away from, walking out as the Grey Cup champions.
Well, I had wondered, having seen both Hamilton and BC play close together. I watched Hamilton in the final game of 4 against the Argos, where the quarterback situation was pretty messy with Jamie Newman there and Jalen Morton coming on to, and Dane Evans dressing, but as the third quarterback with a shoulder injury. But it made me wonder why he was dressing if he couldn't play. I guess they're just in case. But it's messy right now. And I don't know, because I really like Dane Evans. I really think he's a talented QB. I wonder how much it's weighing on his mind, some of the early season struggles and all the giveaways, the picks thrown, which, by the way, were not all his fault. Some were deflected out of receivers' hands and into the hands of opposing players. But he had a couple of those fumbles that were really costly early on. One against Calgary, one against Edmonton, and I think it. I get the feeling that it shook his confidence. I don't know, but I still believe he's capable of being a very good quarterback in this league. But right now, it's not a good situation at the most important position on the field for the Hamilton Tiger Cats, and no pressure, right? You're going up against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in the Hall of Fame game, and the Bombers have yet to lose a game on the road this season.
I can't figure out. I mean, Hamilton, great coaches, great staff, a lot of good talent there. They just really can't seem to get anything together right now.
Yeah, and I'd be cutting the Ticats some slack as a fan, because look, they were 15-3 in 2019 when Dane Evans came on for Jeremiah Masoli, and they didn't miss a beat. And they went on to win the East, and they were the favorites going into the Grey Cup before they ran into that Bomber machine. And then the game in Hamilton last year, it went to overtime. I mean, their record wasn't as good in the regular season, and they finished in second. But, Evans goes, 16 for 16 off the bench for Masoli in Toronto to win the East. And then they came that close. I think it was Jalen Ackland, that was Masoli that came on in the Grey Cup, that close to winning it, and instead lost it in OT. So, as I say, I'd cut the Ticats this season anyway. It's been a brutal year so far, but given what they've done in the last couple of years, I mean, I would certainly, the coaching staff, the administration, I know I'd be cutting them some slack.
In terms of, the Cody Fajardos of the world and Saskatchewan, everything else, are you, what are you tracking there, and just your thoughts on kind of what's happening in Regina? Because, they were, I remember like preseason, it's like, Saskatchewan, they should bump up the salary cap. They should cheat the salary cap. I think it was Glenn Suter was like, they should go all in just so that they can host. And now it's like, shit, I don't even know if they're going to be able to make it to the game.
Well, they have an interesting opportunity still if they do remain fourth in the West because of that crossover. There is an intriguing possibility for a Saskatchewan Roughrider fan that maybe the best route, instead of going through Calgary or going through Winnipeg, maybe the best route to get back home again and host the game is to go through the East. And even though they lost to Toronto twice this year, even though they lost in Montreal this year, that might be the more favorable path. Not that they're going to try to finish fourth if they have a chance to finish third. I wouldn't suggest that. And who knows, given the way BC is right now, if they lose a pair to, if Saskatchewan beats Edmonton and get to 7 wins, and if BC loses back-to-back to Calgary, then, I mean, third still isn't out of the realm of possibility for the Rough Riders instead of fourth place. But as it stands right now, if they win against Edmonton, Edmonton will be officially eliminated, so they'd be that much closer to officially clinching a playoff spot, assuming there is a crossover, because they would still be fourth in the West. But I'm sure people have thought of that possibility. how would fans in Saskatchewan feel about the Rough Riders up against the Blue Bombers, for example, in the Grey Cup, if Saskatchewan can become the first crossover team to get there?
Well, and it would be, I was reading, I think it was last night, or said that they would then be the away team, and Regina, like if they won, right, if they won then it would be Winnipeg hosting them in Regina, which would be remarkable.
It would be, but the way things have gone for the Rough Riders this season, I can't imagine them being upset if they have to use the visitors' dressing room if it means they get to play in the Grey Cup of their home field. It would be odd, but they'd certainly take that right now.
Same question, MBT and everything else. Are you a Cody guy? Cody is, I think, I've said he is the most polarizing, non-polarizing person I've ever seen, right? Like, he's so just like vanilla and chill, but then people love to talk about him.
Yeah, it's the same. We keep going down this road of talking about quarterbacks that, to me, are good quarterbacks and at times have great moments, and then have other moments where, the fans get on them. And it's the most pressure-packed position, I am told, and I have no reason to doubt it, being the starting quarterback in Saskatchewan, where the fan base is so rabid. And he's felt a lot of that. And he's had a lot of criticism, and I think he's had certain limitations with the knee brace, not to make excuses for him, because that's more about how much he runs compared to last year. But I do like him. I like his approach, and I do think that they can win with him too. Maybe I seem like the eternal optimist about all the quarterbacks that we talk about that show signs of greatness at times and then signs of being far less than that. But with Fajardo, I mean, his story it's been great since he became the starter after Zach Collaros got hurt in 2019. And I know he's faced a lot of heat, not just from opposing defenses, but from his own fans this year. But I still think he's capable of getting it done.
He is the only quarterback in the CFL that has us blocked on Twitter. So I get a little brash on there.
Yeah, no, you know what? Yeah, and a lot of others. I know he's gotten on, and Dane Evans too. And it's probably a good idea. Get off social media, because you get lots of fans, and they're angry and they're critical when things don't go well. And I know if I was in their position, there's no way I'd be on social media. That'd be a tough thing to take. I don't think I'd be doing it.
Before I let you go, I have a couple more philosophical questions here before I let you go. Overall, like, just health of the CFL, state of the league right now, like, how are you feeling? We came off COVID, we've came off the CBAs, we didn't merge with the XFL, which was great. How are we feeling now, just a bird's level view? For me, and as I say, I'm probably never the best one to ask about this. Looking at numbers, attendance, the finances, I really don't know, how the league is financially. But I tend to involve myself more in the product on the field. And from that standpoint, despite, the injuries and maybe the lack of depth in quarterback play, I still overall really like it. I'm entertained by it. And that matters to me. And I always have been. The attendance is down without question, and you can't sugarcoat that. So that's something that, and I don't know if the pandemic is related to that at all, that I'd love to see improve in the future. I'd love to see in Toronto, for example, the team be marketed better, because there is a small but rabid fan base there, even though the attendance numbers haven't been that great since the move to BMO Field. But overall, I'm probably never the most practical person to talk about these things, because I see a league that, despite any of the downtimes, and there have been downtimes, has survived and then picked itself up and done very, very well. And so I'm always a believer that way until I hear otherwise, Reed, until there's evidence of teams in trouble or anything like that. I still enjoy the players and I enjoy the product in the field, and that's how I see it. So, I mean, I see good things right now, put it that way. Well, it's interesting. We tracked CFL TV ratings and attendance and stuff, and then now covering like the USFL and seeing some of their hub attendance, you're like, wow, CFL's actually doing really good. But I had a tweet this week, because obviously we're Seattle. We watched the big Russell Wilson game on Monday, and one of our listeners has said, like, how can Seattle fill a stadium 5:15 p.m. Pacific local time, whatever, on a Monday, right? Because it was crazy. Like Lumen Field was like absolutely nuts. We were watching at the bar, and I said, because like NFL fans just show up. Like, CFL, it's like, oh, it's too hot, it's too cold, I got to go farm, my vacation home I'm at. Like, there's always all these, like, I'm trying to figure out the mindset of because it got a lot of traction, at least on my Twitter, of like the CFL fan. It always seems like there's something that, like, well, there was a concert across the street, so I couldn't go. Like, it just always seems like there's some rationale of why, Toronto isn't better or whatever. I'm just curious your thoughts, just coming now that we're seeing NFL crowds and games and stuff again this season.
I don't really know. I wouldn't really have an answer for that. And I believe me, I've spent a lot of time covering the NFL as well, and also enjoyed the NFL since I was a kid. I've loved both leagues and seen them for seen their differences and appreciated their differences too. Which is why I was one, for example, all the little discussions about 4 downs. I've always been against that. It's a 3-down football against 4-down football, and I appreciate the difference. But the NFL is it's an amazing, popular, machine, and it has been for a long, long time. But the CFL has its core of fans that do like to go to games and don't make excuses for it. But I realize that there are fewer fans going to games now, but the viewership, as you talked about, is still strong. So I still think there are a lot of people that are interested in watching the CFL, maybe more on television than going in person. But I don't really know what that's necessarily a reflection of. Fewer going to games. It's not, as I say, it's something when I get there, and not to make excuses for anything else. I just, whatever the crowd happens to be, I concentrate on the game on the field and I enjoy it. I mean, I'm a fan. I go to games. I do go to games, obviously, and I'm privileged enough to work them and still enjoy it. So, but yeah, it's when you're comparing things like that, the tailgating and the crowds coming and stadiums full all the time in the National Football League, that's a tougher comparison. The NFL is truly unique that way.
Last question before, excuse me if I could talk there. Last question before I let you go. Grey Cup favorite this year? Are you Winnipeg, right? I mean, you look at Winnipeg. What do you see as the matchup, and who do you see them facing?
Well, I still think I'll preface it this way. It's easy to take Winnipeg, and that would be my pick, just because they have been so much better than anyone else, at least record-wise, but they've had close games. They had Montreal has beaten them. Toronto came down to a missed extra point that would have forced overtime in Toronto. Calgary has played them very tight as well. So, and I've seen too many years. 2016, Calgary, a prohibitive favorite, lost to Ottawa. The next year, a prohibitive favorite again. The Stampeders come back and they lost to a 9-9 team in Toronto, that was in Ottawa, but against Toronto. So the great thing about the league is you could have prohibitive favorites who could fall on the biggest day of all. Now, having said that, yeah, Winnipeg to me would be the choice. I'll tell you what intrigues me as a CFL historian is to look up the fact that in the modern day of the Canadian Football League, there has never been a Winnipeg Toronto Grey Cup. The last one was 1950. The league officially, the CFL in form has existed decades before that, but the official branding of the CFL was 1958. And since then, so modern day, there hasn't been one between the Bombers and Argos. So I suppose that would be intriguing when you're talking about the 2 first place teams right now, who are justifiable favorites in their divisions. So, but yeah, I mean, how could you not go against Winnipeg right now with the way the Bombers are rolling?
I like that. I don't think I've seen it. It was so in the modern, because that makes it. Yeah, we believe me, we got hammered with all the dates and all the XFL stuff and the 108 or now 109, all this stuff. But yeah, modern day CFL, it's like the Super Bowl era, right? Yeah, in the modern day, I like that. First place.
Yeah, I was going to say, and the CFL, it wasn't known as the CFL, although a lot of those teams, I mean, Winnipeg Blue Bombers, Toronto Argonauts existed in the 30s, for example. But yeah, to your point, like in 1920, the NFL with the Bears and Packers and Lions and Giants, I think, formed, but the modern day NFL, really with the Super Bowl era, was in the mid 1960s, right?
Yeah, interesting. I like that. So Winnipeg and Toronto. Well, Rod, I really appreciate your time coming on and doing all this and then having to go and talk about CFL all weekend. But I really appreciate your time and insight. So thank you so much for stopping by.
Thanks, Ray. It's cool. You've developed some interest in the Canadian Football League. I like it.
I do my best. I do my part, and yeah, a lot of engagement on Twitter. But we have a lot of, like I said, a lot of XFL and USFL American football fans that watch the CFL now. We get the ESPN Plus and all that stuff to try to partake. So I appreciate it.
Great chatting with you.
Well, this is a blast from the past. I think last time we spoke, the XFL and USFL or CFL, all that stuff, Winnipeg was on top of the world. Winnipeg is still on top of the world. Here we have Derek Taylor, voice of the Blue Bombers. How are you, sir?
I'm doing very well. I miss the CFL, XFL stuff because, God, did that make people mad. Even though we're just talking about talking. That's all it was.
I could have anyone on in any week, and the views would just go through the roof. It was very exciting. It's a little harder right now on the XFL side. This week is good, but some weeks it's harder with the news right now.
Yeah, I imagine. Those were interesting times we'll look back on in 20 years and go, oh yeah, that was almost the thing. But here we are.
So we have Derek Taylor. So I'm, you have now, new job, new province, new everything since we last spoke with you. You were at the Blue Bombers. First off, just how are you doing life-wise? How is everything going?
It's good. So I was in Winnipeg for about 14 years earlier in my broadcasting career. So coming back after about 8 years away, it was kind of like coming home. There are people I knew, and I knew where all the roads went to. And I mean, I'm a simple man. If I know where the 7-Eleven is and where the Walmart is, I'm probably going to be comfortable. I had those on lock when I got back in. So no, it's been great. And honestly, when the team wins 12 out of 13 games, it's pretty easy to talk about them.
Yeah, so it's historic run right now. I have Rod Smith also on the show this week, talking with him about kind of Winnipeg's crazes. What is your big takeaways here as we hit week 15, and it could be Winnipeg or otherwise?
It's just that right now, I mean, with the Nathan Rourke injury kind of crippled any regular season drama we were going to have, right? BC was fantastic with Rourke. The one game they lost was that shootout with the Bombers, and that is going to be the two quarterback injuries. Nathan Rourke and Jeremiah Masoli in Ottawa really changed the entire course of the season. And Rourke was going to be MOP. BC was going to be at least second in the West and a real threat in a West final. And yeah, sadly that's it. It's now Winnipeg, and then everybody else figure it out for yourself.
It really does. It seems like last year again, where it did get a little sleepy towards the end of the season. I do think there seems to be more excitement right now. Jake Mayer is causing excitement in Calgary and everything else. Do you think it's a walk in Winnipeg into the Grey Cup at this point? Well,
it's a walk into hosting the West Final, I think. But I mean, they've beaten Calgary 3 times this season, but those games were coin flips in the end, right? The first game doesn't get to overtime because of a Calgary drop in the end zone that gets intercepted. You go, okay, that's a great skill play by Demario Houston to make the interception, but that ball gets caught a lot of times and you're going to overtime and anything can happen. One-score game in the next one, one-score game in the next one. And what we see over time is one-score games have a great deal to do with luck, right? If those bounces go against Winnipeg, and I know that they're set up to not take the penalties and make the turnovers that lead to lucky situations. But if those things go the other way, if they have 2021's West Final where they have 5 turnovers in the first half and they do that against Calgary could win that game for sure. So they don't walk into the Grey Cup, but they walk in at this point, to me, the West Final.
Remember that? Yeah, in Saskatchewan, they had the 5 turnovers. Saskatchewan, and they're like, man, if they could turn the ball over 5 times and still beat Saskatchewan, I think they've got a pretty good shot here.
Well, and that's the thing that Winnipeg for the last 3 years has been, right? That greatness, that competitive greatness, as John Wooden wrote about it back in the day, it doesn't guarantee you a Grey Cup, but it gives you so much latitude and margin for error. You can have 6 turnovers in a game, 5.5. And I was calling that game on the Saskatchewan side, and I said to my partner, Luke Mulder, hey, Luke, Riders have gotten 5 turnovers in this game, and I really don't feel like they're going to win it, right? Because that is how great, again, it guarantees you nothing. Calgary in 2017 was a way better team than Toronto, but here's a 100-yard touchdown to Devere Posey. Here's a 100-yard fumble return touchdown, and Toronto Argonauts are the 2017 Grey Cup champions. it buys you margin for error. That's all it really does in the end.
So this weekend we have Winnipeg against Hamilton. What, in your mind, what is wrong with Hamilton, or what is going wrong with them, or what is happening there?
The biggest one for me is I've never been on Dane Evans as a quarterback, and I've taken some flack from his father. I believe it's his father on Twitter for that. But I've just never seen what other people see in Dane Evans. I see a guy who's unsteady in the pocket, and it's been exposed in a couple of Grey Cups. I see a guy whose passing accuracy is fine, but by the way I move my head when I say fine, it's not great. It's not Ricky Ray or Michael Riley or a Kalaris or a Nathan Rourke this year. It's fine. There's a lot about Dane Evans that I think is fine. His decision-making leaves me scratching my head at times. His propensity to turn the ball over is absolutely crushing. He had 7 fumbles before I blinked this CFL season, and you just can't have that. So there's so much about it that to me was a problem. They lost some receivers. They lost some offensive line. That certainly contributes. And then defensively, injuries were really battering them in the first part of the season. And still today, Simone Lawrence on the 6-game injured list. That should have been the best or second best defense in the league. But to me, it's injuries that have kept them from rising to that level.
Well, it's hard, and we were talking the Nathan Rourke injury and him going down. Highlights really, the spotlight on maybe the subpar CFL quarterbacks in general, right? And here we are trying to cover the USFL and the XFL, and we've got all these leagues and trying to get all these quarterbacks, and there's just not that many, CFL or otherwise, good quarterbacks to play. But quarterback play is certainly an issue without Rourke and Kalaris this year, right?
Oh, 100%. We were on our Football North podcast, one that we do here. And the question was, okay, well, at the moment, who's the second best quarterback? With Rourke out, it was very clearly Rourke and Kalaris were the top 2 quarterbacks in the league. And then just a yawning chasm to whoever's number 3rd. So Jeremiah Masoli's out. Would he be the 3rd best quarterback in the league? Is McLeod Bethel Thompson in Toronto the 3rd best quarterback? And I'm still charting Toronto-Ottawa from last week, and I watched McLeod Bethel Thompson, and I go, there's so much here to like, and yet I'm always wanting more. So if you chose MBT, I get it. It's tight. I said, you know what? Maybe it's Cody Fajardo. He's just being bombarded with pressure this season and injuries to that receiving core that he has not near had the chance to shine that he's had in past seasons. Knee injury as well, but he's still relatively accurate. He's still sort of escapable. Offensive line is just absolutely crushing them. Protection is just killing SAS this year. So is it Fajardo? But the fact that we're having a conversation of name 6 guys and they might all be the 3rd best quarterback in the league just means it's a real drop off from currently Kalaris to kind of ever. It might be Jake Mayer. Jake Mayer, who's 9 years old, might be the second best quarterback playing right now.
Yeah, the mayor. You have the mayor. I like Jake Mayer. He's. I said off season I had him and Rourke, and I said I'm putting my hitching my wagon to you guys. I want the young guns here that are going to go. Your former team broadcasting. I'm just looking even last week. I had a wedding on Saturday, so I missed a lot of the Winnipeg and Saskatchewan of it all. The 54-20. What happened in that game, and what is going on with the Rough Riders with Cody or without Cody?
Yeah, there was whatever it was that led to the Riders. There's some thought, was it food poisoning? Was it just a bug running through the team? I think we've kind of settled on it was a bug running through the team. It was very clear that they were crippled by that. When you watch and you think, okay, well, they didn't have their best receiver in Kean Schaefer-Baker. They didn't have another Justin McInnes was going to start. They didn't have their top fullback. They didn't have a starting halfback. Their offensive line was shaken up. Guys were taking IVs. Guys were threatening to vomit during the game. I think this is just a guess, but Josiah St. John started the game and then was not in the game at the end. I feel like maybe that was related. It would be unfair to think that is a representation of the Saskatchewan Roughriders because to me, and I don't have any inside info on this, but just seeing what was a 2-point tight game won by a 55-yard field goal one week becomes a 34-point waxing the following week, something had to change. And I just think even apart from maybe a handful of guys who were played, to me, there were a lot of guys that were punished by whatever was running through that team. So when I kind of evaluate the Bombers and Riders 3 weeks from now, I will forget that this game happened, because there's no way Sask was anywhere close to what they truly are on that game.
Yeah, I saw Danny Austin, a lot of tweets about like diarrhea, and I was like, I am missing something right now, because I was at a wedding. We had lost power in the middle of the cocktail hour, headed into reception, so I was fighting a lot of battles at that point versus tracking the the Saskatchewan game on Twitter. I was like, what is happening here?
Well, like Edmonton getting absolutely pumped by Calgary, that game makes sense, right? Because Edmonton's been pumped a few times. Saskatchewan getting clubbed so badly when they played so tight against Winnipeg the following week. There are external factors. As my radio partner Doug Brown said, I think it's a fluid situation in Sask. I'm like, yeah, and I'm not going to follow up any words on that one. Yeah, whatever it was, the September 30th game will be drastically different in my mind.
So we got the bye week this week for Saskatchewan. BC's going in, with Vernon Adams starting. Thoughts on that? I mean, BC's our team. I mean, am I in for a savior here? Is he coming in to save the day?
I wish that was the case, because to me, that's the only move BC had, right, to try to save their season. They haven't officially said Rourke is out for the year, I don't believe, but in my mind, Rourke's out for the year because Liz Frank is a tough one. So they had to look at this and go, Michael O'Connor now injured. Antonio Pipkin has some real nice things about him. He moves really well, but his accuracy is just not there. So what can we do? Okay, so Vernon Adams is available. Let's go get Vernon Adams. To me, that's the only move they could make. They pay a first-round pick to do it. It's a smart move. I mean, the whole season, the whole year for BC has been really smart. We have this guy we think can be good at quarterback. He makes a minimum salary because he's still in his rookie contract. Let's load this team. And it worked out great when we realized Rourke was MOP level player. I thought if he was even average, if he was Matt Nichols, they were going to be a problem. He was MOP, and they were absolutely a problem. So they go get Vernon Adams. In 2019, I think the CFL, after 19, I think the CFL really wanted Fajardo, Vernon Adams, East, West, two young quarterbacks, young being a relative term, mobile, arms, can lead teams, blah, 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 blah. I just have never seen the consistency from Vernon Adams that makes me think he can be an elite player in this league. His accuracy is just all over the place. Decision-making. There was a game in Calgary last year where he's marching down for the winning drive. His final pass pulls Geno Lewis out of the end zone for what would have been the winning touchdown, and it's a catch at like the 1. And you go, after you one-hop that one to Winnipeg earlier, this is what I've seen from you for a long time. There's so much to like, but the fundamental thing of being accurate and careful with the football and knowing when and where to make the plays, it's not there. It's BC's shot. I'm glad they shot their shot. I don't think they'll be successful with it, but if they are, I'm happy to eat my words, because that team is ready to go if they have even an average guy at quarterback.
Well, so you're saying that you don't think Vernon is even average here headed into BC?
I think, that's a great question. No. Like, he's got so many above average talents, but when you put them all together with the rest of the stuff, I don't really think so. Like, his coach had enough of them after, a game and a quarter this year that it was done, and it was Trevor Harris time. And maybe it was the GM at the time, who's now the coach, that had enough. But I've just not been a believer in Vernon Adams in the whole quarterbacking picture. As for a guy who could be a weapon in spots, sure, but as for the whole quarterbacking picture, I've still not seen it, and Vernon is not new to the CFL. He's been around a long time.
Well, that is the issue, I think, sometimes, and obviously the NFL and everyone suffers from this as well. Is like, we've had these guys now 3, 4, 5 years. Okay, well, if we keep moving them around, like, maybe they're finally good. I mean, if Vernon doesn't do it here, I don't know what's going to happen to him. I mean, it might be kind of the final nail in whatever that is, because you really are set up for success.
It really is. Like, this team, like, the receivers on this team are crazy. Like, is Brian Burnham. It was a top 5 receiver in the league. Like Brian Burnham, Lucky Whitehead, Dominic Rhymes. Dominic Rhymes is unbelievable. Like the guys they have on the injured list were making catches over top of the Bombers in that Week 5 game. Just big deep ball touchdowns. They have kind of every receiver you would like. You want a little speedster? Sure. You want big bodies that can win jump balls? Boom. You want those big bodies who are smart enough to find the holes in zones? Boom. You want Javon Katoy, who could obliterate dudes, make those catches across the middle as well, and just generally be very cognizant of the fact that he is a huge human with great skills. Love it. They've got everything. Burnham doesn't drop anything. I think he maybe has one drop this year. They're set up. They can run the football. They're much better up front than they were last year. That defense hasn't been what I thought it was, but Boom Gwacham. People are finally, I think, catching on to the fact that Boom Gwacham is an absolute terror off that defensive end. David Menard, who was he was the East nominee for most outstanding Canadian last year, goes to BC. Every time I flip on a game, he's wrecking people. There are so many good parts. Jordan Williams in the middle can't stop tackling dudes. Ben Laddick's getting reps. That back six should be. I thought they were better than this, but man, that whole team, there's so much to like in that BC team, and they just need that lift back up. And I mean, we're kind of all praying for a soft Liz Frank injury, and maybe here's, oh my God, that's Nathan Rourke's music for the West final would be, or one of the West playoff games would be pretty great.
But I mean, it does seem like, and I see the Facebook groups and everyone, and it does seem like BC is very much written off at this point, which is remarkable considering they're still, they're still, what is it, 6 weeks?
Yeah, they still have 7 games left to play, right? 8-3. They were propelled to the heights by Rourke. Let's not kid ourselves. Like near 80% completion rate. He's going to finish with the best completion rate in a single season in the history of the Canadian Football League. His numbers to expected are incredible this season. Everything about that. So they were lifted to these heights by Rourke. But I still think if there's somebody, like if there is even an average quarterback, that team could do something. That team can beat Calgary, in my mind, in a West semifinal, and with the right balances in Winnipeg in a West final could surprise. You just have to be getting that average quarterbacking. And honestly, you don't have all the time in the world, right? Like the season only has 7 more games left in it for them. No more buys, so practice time gets a little limited. Will they be at full speed by the playoffs with Vernon Adams? I wait to see.
But you don't think there was another option?
I really don't. Like, people are wondering, is Bo Levi Mitchell going to move from Calgary? Is Calgary really going to move him to a division rival and the team you're likely to play in the playoffs? No backups anywhere else that I like. No, there really isn't. Like, no, I honestly don't believe there was. Like, trade for Jeremiah Masoli and hope he's back in time for the playoffs. But yeah, I just don't think there was another move. I always thought it would come from Montreal. I always thought Montreal would be the linchpin on this season, but I thought it would be Trevor Harris, right? Because he was the backup when the season started. I thought, who's making the move for Harris when a quarterback gets injured? But by that time, Harris was the starter, and then it was Vernon Adams. So that was the only thing they could do. I'm glad they did it. We wait to see how it turns out.
Yeah, I was terrified because I remember that they were saying that Trevor might come in as the backup or he would compete with Nathan, and I didn't want that. I thought I'd rather take the unknown than Michael O'Connor, but now we know that. I mean, obviously injuries there too, but I would rather take an unknown that could be better than kind of like settling for 3 out of 10 or whatever,
It's fair. It's totally fair. I think those receivers could go a long way to making an average quarterback look great because they are like Is that the best? Yeah, it's the best receiving core in the league with how Duke Williams' season has gone in Sask. I would have thought maybe Sask, but no, BC is the best receiving core in the league by, as I think about it, a pretty good margin at this point.
At Calgary, we talked Mayer, Bo Levi, all that. I mean, Mayer carries this. You see them firmly in number 2 here in the West?
I think with the way it'll shake out, right? They are behind BC right now, but a couple of head-to-head games. Calgary's a good team. Like, Calgary has 4 losses this year, 3 of them in 1-score games against Winnipeg, and 1 of them was to a Nathan Rourke BC Lions team. There's no shame in that because you're busy lumping everybody else. Like, that's a good team with a good defense. And now with Mayer in there, they're running the offense that they want to run. Reggie Bagleton looks like the guy who went to the Green Bay Packers for a bit. Kadeem Carey can run on anybody, it feels like, on days. And the Bagleton-Kamar Jordan pairing didn't really work out. Jordan's now out, but to me, they have more than enough receiving talent as well. There's everything. Plus, by the way, the experience of having won double-digit games since Christ was a Cowboy. Like, they have everything in Calgary. So they're a team I don't really want, calling games for the Bombers. I don't really want the Bombers to face them in the West Final because they are one of, at this moment, one team that can keep Winnipeg from the Grey Cup title in my mind.
We had you on last. There was a lot of chaos going on in the world. Seems like CFL is kind of, we're leveled now. All right, we have Genius Sports, all this kind of stuff. I mean, do you feel like we've moved past all that? We're kind of full steam ahead now, doing what the CFL needs to do. Or are there things that they could be working on?
I think we are full steam ahead. Like, we kind of have to be. There's extended period of labor peace. What is it? 7 years in which we don't have to talk about that stuff ever again until 2028 or 9 or whatever it is. I'm super happy about that. Edmonton reported good financials. Winnipeg reported great financials. Like Edmonton or Sask, I forget which one was the first one to report, but the publicly owned teams have reported good financials, community-owned teams. So that seems to be super encouraging. There's probably a ton more to be done, but I think for the most part, we're super happy to have football back going ahead and having these storylines that we're not focusing on it for the moment. I'm sure there's more they could be doing. I still don't. This is my own ignorance. I don't really know what Genius Sports does and where it will pay off in the long run. But I mean, I have no reason to particularly complain about that. I just don't know what it is they do, and that's on me and not anybody else. They've made their forays into the gambling space. The clubs are making their forays into the gambling space. The broadcasters are as well. So it seems to be moving ahead, but we'll know more if perhaps the Montreal Alouettes do end up going up for sale at some point. What will emerge as a bidder for Montreal? That might be the barometer for what's the health of the league at that moment.
Were you floored that Gary that all that kind of happened over the last 2 weeks like it did?
Well, I'm not in favor of anything that gets Gary Stern off Twitter. Let's not kid ourselves. I love it. Gary's fantastic. I mean, might need some capitalization on his tweets, but that's just nitpicky. I love that an owner's engaged, right? I love that a guy who is important and is in charge is engaged. We have owners. We have club presidents who aren't going to do that. We have ownership who will reach out a little bit. Bob Young in Hamilton isn't going to go on Twitter and be like, guaranteed win night, let's go. Amar Doman is doing great things in BC. When I walked through BC, we were there for week 5. I was super impressed with how BC's going for it. There were billboards everywhere. There was an activation in front of the Vancouver Art Gallery or some art gallery in Vancouver with inflatable lion heads. This is great, but I think you need those. You need those owners. They're not Jerry Jones, but they are Jerry Jones-ish in, hey, well, I'm going to put myself out here, and I'm going to draw attention, and it's going to be good for my team. And I love it. So whatever brings more Gary Stern into my life and more, Gary S 2020 on Twitter, whatever his Twitter handle is, 100% in favor.
Well, and I'm not, you guys are all a little bit more, and I deal with a lot of like the Danny Austins of the world. They're like, I'm a reporter and we're trying to, I am a wedding videographer that does this. Like, I enjoy a little bit more of the theatrics of it, right? Like, I'm not walking in the 3-piece suit to the press box. Like, I enjoy kind of the interactions. And I think Gary popped back on last week. So I think he's at least like, there's at least, he's alive there on the raft, but I don't really know what that means for the future. But at least he's back on, I think, in some regard.
Oh, anything that brings heat, right? Anything that brings heat, like these are competitive people from ownership on down to the players. Anything that brings the heat. When former Bomber Marcus Sales in advance of the Week 5 game called the Winnipeg offense vanilla, and then the offense just rung it up on them. You're like, yes, I need all of this. I need this. I'm glad Sales said it. He's probably not glad that they absolutely took him to the woodshed, but I mean, anything that brings heat, because players and teams are kind of conservative with, I don't want to inflame everybody because everybody's good and it could bite me in the butt. But as a fan and someone who wants this more, I'll keep saying heat around the league, bring it on. Anybody who wants to be a part of that, let's go. Here's a microphone. Let's have at it. And let's make this more hotly contested. Let's invent new rivalries. The Bombers had one this season where the two Grey Cups they've won, the 19 and 21, they were wearing their white jerseys. And they were both against the Hamilton Tiger Cats. So when Hamilton came to Winnipeg, we're not wearing our traditional blues. We're going to wear our whites at home just to let the Ticats know. Like, perfect. Let's fire it up with anybody. The Banjo Bowl is a great example of not the Labor Day rematch in Winnipeg. It's the Banjo Bowl because in 2004, whatever it was, Troy Westwood called Saskatchewan Banjo Pickin' Inbreds. Perfect. It just took that game and changed it. So where are more of those? Where's the Montreal-Ottawa superheated rivalry? How can we make that be a thing? How can we spread out the Toronto-Hamilton games so they don't play 4 times in 5 weeks and we can savor that a little better? Stuff like that. Whatever brings more spice to these games, and if it's an owner, if it's a GM who wants to mouth off, I got a microphone ready to go.
Yeah, I did like that, how it was everyone was bemoaning the Hamilton and Toronto games, and then like I think the second one they had, it was really exciting, and then the CFL account's like, "We'll see." It's like, okay, well, you got lucky with that one. I think sometimes luck, and it turns out like, hey, we were right all along. But no, I do. I think like God forbid you have some excitement here talking about this, like Cody Fajardo last year yelling at his receivers. I don't have enough people working, but I mean, we need to have a little bit of drama. So I think that's good.
It'd be great. It may not be great for their individual workplaces, but for the whole CFL space, anything we can capitalize on, and just any emotion, right? Be it love, be it hate. Love it.
Well, Derek, I really appreciate it. Hopefully it won't be, a year and a half or whatever against us. But I knew you're busy and like you're doing, the sports cage. Now you're moving to Winnipeg. Like, I'm like, Derek's busy. Like, I don't need to be bothering him, but maybe I'll hit you up again now. Really appreciate you coming on.
Hey, any chance to talk about the CFL? I love it. Thanks for having me.
Huge thanks to all of our guests today. Greg Parks, like I said, late night recording for him, extended time, taking time out from his schoolwork and hanging out with his girlfriend to come on the show. Really appreciate Greg taking time, like I said, breaking down all those rosters. I hope you guys appreciate that. Like I said, I benefit from that almost as much as anyone because I don't have the time to do the deep dive like the writers do. And so I really appreciate people like Greg and Anthony, Mike, Jay over at News Hub. I know Andy's working on stuff and Matt, but all the writers, this is really your time to shine. And I just, use that, right? Benefit from that. I think this is really a good time to kind of give people that insight that you only written word can, because no one's going to listen to it. 16-hour podcast breaking down. Maybe they would, maybe Max would, but no one's going to listen to a 16-hour podcast breaking down all that. So I thought Greg was good, supplemental stuff on the website, all that. Really appreciate Rod Smith coming on, spending time before flying out to the games for him. And then Derek Taylor working around the Blue Bombers schedule, coming on to chat CFL. One giveaway item before, remember, like and subscribe. This has been a long time. I've been waiting to see these photos, and they finally come. So the longtime listener, Kev _new 360 on Twitter, long time. I think Kev, first week or two, I believe Kevin lives in Australia. But Kevin got, and this is really cool because this has never been made. This is like my XFL Dragons when I have the away jersey that, obviously they made, but they never sold. Kevin has a Landry Jones custom XFL Dallas Renegades jersey. So you see Kevin here. I have the photos up, number 12. Kevin looks excited. So just keep that in mind. Kevin got this courtesy of Royal Retros. They shipped that out. Really appreciate Dustin and everyone over there. Great giveaway item for Kevin. Remember, we have the Brian Scott that is going to be signing this week. Signed Spring League football. We're going to be giving away here when we hit 2,500 subscribers. Really appreciate everyone's support today. I have rambled a really long time. Thanks as always. Please like and subscribe. Share the podcast. I got some good guests lined up, making some good inroads. Had some good phone calls this week. I think things are moving along in that way. Thank you all again, and see you next time. I'm running out of words. Take care.